The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and today I'm very happy to welcome back to the show once again, Sylvia Barbara Soberton. Welcome back, Sylvia.
Hello, Rebecca. Thank you so much for having me again.
You know, I love having you on the show because we can always talk about pretty much anything. But today we're going to talk about a subject that really I honestly do not cover very often on the show because I feel like everybody talks about Anne Boleyn. And so I try to sometimes steer away from her a little bit. But today we are going to talk about Anne Boleyn and a paper that you recently published on her. And why don't you let everybody know what this paper is about?
Mm-hmm. So the paper's title is Marquis or Marchioness, Analyzing B.L. Harley M.S. 303 and Other Previously Unpublished Sources About Anne Boleyn's Elevation to the Marquisate of Pembroke. So it's a little bit long title, but what it's really about is that you will often encounter the claim in historical books that Anne Boleyn was made a Marquis of Pembroke, that she received a male title. However, as I argued in my paper, this is incorrect because she was in fact created a Marchioness, the correct feminine equivalent of a Marquis. What was unusual, and I can agree about this with other historians, is that she held this title in her own right, not through marriage or inheritance, which was rare for a woman of her time, but again, not unusual or not unprecedented, because Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, received the title of the earldom of Salisbury that belonged to her family, to the members of her family, and she held the title in her own right, so independently of men, because she was the king's woman and cousin and Plantagenet, so a very important lady.
Yes. So help me remember. Did Margaret Pole receive this before Anne Boleyn received hers?
Yes, she did. Okay. It was, I think, 1512.
Oh.
And some historians state that she went through the ceremony of ennoblement, like Anne Boleyn. But that's not the case. I found that Margaret received this title through the Act of Parliament, and she didn't have to go through the ceremony of creation. Which, again, we can say it was unusual or maybe not that unusual because people in Tudor England or people in medieval England were not really used to conferring such high titles upon women independently of men. Because if you were a woman, you held the same title as your husband. So you held the title as a wife of someone or alternatively as a daughter of someone. But with Margaret Pole, she wasn't married to an earl. She was the earl, but she was a countess. She married a man, Richard Pole, who wasn't really that important. He didn't have a noble title of his own. But then again, Margaret, this title of the Countess of Salisbury, the earldom of Salisbury, belonged to her family. So it wasn't like Henry VIII just conjured up this title out of the thin air. It belonged to the family that she was born into, and that's why she received that title and not other title. With Anne Boleyn, we have something a little bit different because she was Henry VIII's mistress. We can say, okay, she didn't have to, she didn't sleep with him. She didn't have sex with him for many years. But still, she was his mistress in every other way. I think in every other meaning of the word, because he promised to marry her, so she was his queen in waiting, his betrothed. They didn't sleep with each other, but she was almost his wife. We could say he was almost his wife for many years. Queen in waiting, wife in waiting, really a very anomalous position, we could say. And with Anne, we could say also that the title that she received, the title of a Marchioness of Pembroke, it was tied to the Tudor dynasty already because Henry VIII's father was born in a Pembroke castle. His Henry Tudor's uncle, Jasper Tudor, he had the title of the Earl of Pembroke. So it was really a title that was tied to the Tudors for a very long time. And to give Anne Boleyn the title of a Marchioness of Pembroke was kind of to show that she belonged to the Tudor family, if you will. that she was becoming adopted to the Tudor family, and in the Patents of Creation of Anne as Marchioness, Henry VIII refers to her as our dearest cousin, Anne Rochford. Curiously, not Anne Boleyn, because she was using the surname Rochford from 1529 when her father was made Earl of Wiltshire and Ormond, and she and her siblings then adopted the surname Rochford. So from 1529 onwards, she didn't use Boleyn as her surname, but Rochford. So she was Anne Rochford.
Yeah, I think we forget about that sometimes because we always know her as Anne Boleyn. That wasn't always what she went by. Let's talk a little bit about the title too, because you discovered that it was the female version, not the male version, which we've been commonly told, which is kind of a big deal to learn this. So good job on discovering that. Congratulations. The titles is where this gets kind of confusing to me, and I don't know if you can explain it or we can talk about it a little bit. Now we have Marquis, which is spelled Marquis, Marchioness, which we all know, but then we also have Marquess, which is like Marquess. Are Marquis and Marquess? Are they?
Yeah, so Marquis and Marquess are used for men, and they are used interchangeably. But in English, in British English, it's more often used the Marquis, the title Marquis.
Okay.
And Marchioness is a female title. And historians very often say that Anne Boleyn received a male title of Marquis. And that's because in English, the word Marchioness was seldom used in the 16th century. And women who were married to marquises were referred to as Lady Marquis, very rarely as Marchioness. And I think that the confusion stems from the wording. But then again, I was very curious about what the Patents of Creation say, because with Anne Boleyn, we are lucky because we have the Patents of Creation. And the Patents of Creation are documents that were produced when somebody was raised to peerage. And the Patents of Creation contains every information about their title, their lands, their new income, and stuff like that. Formalities, really, but it's very useful if you are analyzing it. So I decided to analyze Patents of Creation. They are preserved in the British Library. And of course, those documents are not unknown to Tudor historians. It is well known that those patents exist. But so far, nobody has ever gone into detail and analyzed them, word by word, as I did. Maybe because it's in Latin. But anyway, I did it. And what I've discovered is that in Latin, it says very clearly that Anne Boleyn was made Marchionissa Pembrokiae, which means in Latin, Marchioness of Pembroke. So it's very clear that it's not a male title, it's female.
So where do you think this idea that it was the male title comes from then?
I think that's very likely that it comes from the fact that the word itself, Marchioness, was very rarely used in England. I think it was the case made by Antonia Fraser in her book about 6 Wives of Henry VIII, when she says that the word Marchioness was very rare. And when I went to analyze that in the Letters and Papers series, how often was a Marchioness called a Marchioness, it's very rare. So she's usually Lady Marquis. And Anne Boleyn was referred to very often by her contemporaries as Lady Marquis. But she's also referred to as Marchioness. For example, Edward Hall in his chronicle says that she's a Marchioness of Pembroke. She was made a Marchioness of Pembroke. Anne Boleyn's brother dedicated a translation of Pistoles and Gospels to the most honorable, the Lady Marchioness of Pembroke, and so on. So we have really a lot of evidence that her contemporaries believed and knew that she was not a Marquis, but a Marchioness, Lady Marchioness of Pembroke.
Yeah, okay. So her contemporaries knew, and Henry created her as such. And with this title, what did she receive?
So it's very interesting. Why did Henry VIII create her a Marchioness of Pembroke?
Yeah.
Because the most often cited explanation is that Anne and Henry were preparing to go to Calais in 1532. So August, September, October, they were preparing to meet Francis I of France, because Henry VIII was very eager to secure Francis's endorsement of his marriage to Anne, because Anne was very famously a Francophile. She was basically raised in France at the court of Claude of Valois, Francis I's wife. And she was as French as a French woman born, it was said about her. And so she naturally saw the French as her allies. And Henry VIII also, he kind of had a love-hate relationship with the French, more hate than love, but okay, at this particular period, it was love. So he did everything that was in his power to present Anne Boleyn as his future wife, as his future queen, and that's why he gave her the title of a Marchioness of Pembroke. That's one explanation. It's a good explanation, and it's accurate. But there are two other explanations. One is financial independence for Anne, because with the title of the Marchioness of Pembroke came lands in Wales. So by administering those lands, not by herself, but by deputies and by people appointed by the king, she had an independent source of income. And she became a very wealthy landowner. She had £1,000 per year. So that's a huge amount of money to be had. Lady in waiting earned £10. So imagine having
quite a difference.
£1,000 to your title. Very rich, very wealthy lady. Henry VIII, by giving her this title and this independent income, made sure that she was not anymore his burden, his financial burden, so to speak, because we have evidence that he paid for everything for her. In the privy purse expenses from 1529 to 1532, he paid for everything for her. Her furs for the Lady Anne, clothes, jewels to wear, everything. So now she's an independent landowner, so she can afford everything herself. And then again, the third reason, I think, is safety net, just in case if Henry VIII would not marry her for some reason. Of course, Henry was Henry, and he always got what he wanted. So I think for him, in his mindset, it was not really a question if he would marry Anne. He would marry her. Just the question was when. So they were kind of waiting for the green light from Francis I, and they were hoping for other outcomes. But I think that this safety net was quite a reason why. Because if he was not able to marry her, and Anne, for some reason, would never marry, because she would have been perceived as damaged goods, king's former mistress. So she at least had the title, right? So she was a Marchioness of Pembroke, she had her own money, and the patent of creation stated that any child born to her, sons, even if out of wedlock, would have been able to inherit the title. So the understanding was that perhaps if she was in a relationship with the king, they had children, those children were illegitimate, they inherited the title of, the Marquisate of Pembroke goes to them. So many reasons, but those three reasons, I think, are the most important.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, to think about the fact that Anne was not necessarily very popular with the king's subjects at the time. And the fact that Henry was paying for so much of Anne's things that it almost makes sense for him to give her this title and go, look, I'm not necessarily giving her all of this money. Now she's making it on her own with these lands. Do you think that had something to do with it?
Yes, I think so, because, when Anne Boleyn became Henry VIII's mistress or his love interest, she was only a daughter of a knight. Her father was, he received the double earldom of Wiltshire and Ormond in 1529, largely thanks to Anne's influence. But Anne was not a great lady in her own right. She was related to people who were important, so the Dukes of Norfolk and Earls of Ormond. But as a person, as a woman, she was not that important in the great scheme of things. So by giving her the title, Henry VIII was elevating her above others, and he was also trying to present her as a wife material on an international political stage, because it also reflected on him, who he takes as his wife. And it's very interesting that the description of the ceremony, again, very rarely quoted by historians, states that, and I'm going to quote a little from it, it says, "It is to be remembered that the king gave unto the said lady a patent of preeminence and prerogative to be above all other marquises of this realm, which for certain causes was not openly read." So that's quite scandalous, isn't it? She's given precedence over other marquises, although other marquises are male.
Yeah. So who were those other people that she was given precedence over the male ones? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Was this before Dorset was a marquis?
Yes.
Okay.
So we have, when I was researching, I first went to research how many marquises were there in Henry VIII's reign. So there was one inherited, Dorset, and two created. So Exeter was created in 1525 and Pembroke in 1532.
Okay.
Now the Dorsets were related to Elizabeth Woodville. They sprang from her son. And the Exeter was Henry VIII's cousin, Henry Courtenay, who had the title of the Earl of Devonshire before he was created a Marquis of Exeter in 1525. So that was a very unusual title because it had that French ring to it. It was not a very old title. It was created, I think, in the 14th century. And because it was so French, I think Henry VIII gave Anne the Marquisate of Pembroke because it was French sounding, and they were trying to play it to the French, like, oh, look, she loves the French, she will be your ally, and I will be your ally, because it's curious that Henry VIII didn't give her the title, for example, of a Countess of Pembroke or a Duchess of Pembroke, but a Marchioness of Pembroke. That's an interesting question about why, but I think it's because the Marquisate is so French sounding, and Anne was promoting herself as more French than a French woman born, reading French, being raised in France, serving the French queen, and we could go on because she was very French, even beheaded by a Frenchman from Calais. So
I find it so interesting that he didn't make her a duchess, because a duchess in the peerage ranks higher than Anne did. So to me, it has always been a little mind-boggling why he didn't make her a duchess. But
well, I think that this would make Anne look like mistress a little bit too much, because in France, Francis I gave his mistress a title of the Duchess d'Étampes. So everybody knew that she was his mistress and she was a duchess. So I think that would be a little step too far, maybe linking Anne to, being a mistress of the king. Although, okay, everybody knew that she was his mistress. I think, it's always emphasized Anne Boleyn didn't sleep with the king until probably 1532, when they were returning from Calais, from France, and when she finally yielded. And Edward Hall says that Henry and Anne married secretly on 14th of November 1532, and around that time Anne Boleyn became pregnant and with Elizabeth, with her first child. But okay, she was his mistress, because how else would you describe a woman who is a love interest of a man who wants to marry her, who wants to divorce his wife for her? she's mistress, but she didn't sleep with her. And I think it's very interesting that she is described as Henry VIII's whore, as various epithets. And she didn't sleep with him. That must have been for her very unpleasant, and for Henry VIII as well, because she was holding herself, for marriage. And she did marry him eventually, but we know how that played out eventually. Not well for Anne.
No, definitely not well. I have a hard time believing that, okay, maybe they didn't have intercourse, but I really think there were other things that were going on.
Yeah.
How could she have kept his interest that long? I don't think he would have stayed interested if she had been like, nope, full stop, we're not doing anything.
I mean, the interesting thing about it is that we look back with hindsight, and for us, it's like, it's 6 years without sex, scandalous. But for them, it was like happening, unfolding, like Henry and Anne, they thought that they will be married within a year of initiating the divorce case. So it's like, okay, I'm holding for marriage, not having sex, and then a year goes by and nothing. Then another year goes by, and then again, nothing. And that's year after year after year. But as you say, there is evidence in their love letters that Henry VIII wrote to Anne that there were other ways of expressing love for each other, and not necessarily through full intercourse. So Henry VIII says that he wants to kiss her little duckies, which oops, breasts. He wants to kiss her breasts, and he was coming towards her. So there was this Blackfriars trial happening, and Anne Boleyn was lodged somewhere else, and Henry VIII was like, I'm coming towards you, and I can't wait to be with you on an evening to kiss you. So it's really, they did have intimacies. It's, I think it's crazy to think that they wouldn't express their love, As you say, there were other ways. And, Henry VIII was quite a fleshly man, to be honest. His contemporaries said that he liked women. So I can't believe that he wouldn't consummate his match to Anne in some way, at least. I mean, he sent her an animal, a heart, and he said, like, when you will be eating this flesh, think of me, because I would that my flesh was in your mouth, something like that. So, imagine what he was trying to express with that. I know.
Yes.
And everybody knows.
Yes. Wow. He was such a poet, wasn't he?
You know what? Sometimes I don't know why those letters are described as love letters. Because if you read, for example, the letters that Thomas Seymour and Catherine Parr were exchanging, I think those were the love letters, that you can express your love in such a beautiful and tender way, and not necessarily in a very explicit way like Henry did. So yeah, I've seen better examples of love letters elsewhere. But okay, those are love letters.
Yeah, for sure. So I can't help but think, you mentioned Seymour. So now I'm going to bring up Jane Seymour, because Henry didn't raise her to any title. He didn't raise Anne of Cleves to any title other than the king's sister. Catherine Howard, Catherine Parr, none of them really received this honor like Anne did. Why do you think that is?
Well, to be honest, Anne Boleyn, her rise to queenship was quite long. So that's why she received the title, because Henry VIII didn't really know how this would end. Would he be able to marry her? With Jane Seymour, she was queen. So obviously she didn't need any other title, and she was quite quickly, she supplanted Anne quite quickly, so no need for other titles. With Catherine Howard, then again, very quick. Anne of Cleves is very interesting because she became Henry VIII's beloved sister. And what that means, I don't think it's such an honor, because that means she was his subject and he could do whatever he pleased with her. If she misbehaved, she's his subject. He can punish her however he likes. So she, by becoming his sister, she lost her independent status of a foreigner, because foreigner cannot be persecuted, he cannot be executed. As the king's sister, she's his subject. He can do as he pleased with her. So I don't think it was such a huge honor as it's made out to be.
That's a good point. I never thought of it that way before. People always say, oh, she was protected then because he gave
Not
her this.
really protected, but from whom?
Yeah,
Not from Henry.
oh my gosh, that's a
That
good
was an
point.
instrument of intimidation, I think, because interestingly, Anne signed herself in the letter to the king and in a book of hours that she gave him as Anna, the daughter of Cleves. So she was like, I'm still from Cleves. I still have family there. Remember, just, reminding here that Cleves, I'm not I'm not yours to deal with as you please. So I think this was instrument of intimidation. Sure, she had, the precedence over other ladies other than, not precedence, not over the king's daughters or his wives, but still,
Yeah.
instruments of intimidation. So
Henry, good old Henry, right?
good old Henry. We think how generous of him, right? He gave her everything, but why did he do it? To push her out of the way, just get out. I want to marry Catherine Howard. Just move away.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that was what Henry did, wasn't it? I mean, he did, and the point that you made about Jane Seymour makes sense. Now that once you said it, I thought, yeah, duh, obviously.
But of course, you meant before she became queen, because
Yes.
if it's Jane Seymour's rise to power is really meteoric. It's so quick. I think it's because Henry VIII didn't want to waste any time. He was getting older. He didn't have a son. He didn't have time or energy for another lengthy annulment. That's why Anne had to go. He had to kill her in order to get rid of her.
Yeah. Part of me believes, and I have no evidence to back this up, and I know other people have made this claim before, but part of me believes that Jane Seymour may have been pregnant, and that's why there was such a rush to marriage.
Or maybe she thought she was pregnant.
Yes. Because
I think the math doesn't quite add up if she was pregnant in May 1536. But you're right about that there is a rumor recorded in the Letters and Papers series that the lady was believed to have been pregnant. And that's why Henry VIII married her, because that was people's explanation of why Anne Boleyn's downfall was so swift and so unprecedented and so scandalous and quick. Because who executes their own wife? Who does that? And it was unprecedented even on the scale in the 16th century Europe to execute your wife. And I think that's how people explained it to themselves. She must be pregnant. He's in a hurry to legitimize the son. But I think the math that just doesn't add up here, because the son was born in October 1537, so that would have been a very long pregnancy. But if we are talking about pregnancies, then it took Jane quite quick to conceive. It was about 8 months. So it's quite quick. Although Henry VIII was, talking about how she's not pregnant, because Anne was pregnant almost immediately, perhaps even after their first time. It's that quick. But with Jane, he was they were trying and then nothing, and then another cycle and nothing, and must have been a very stressful time for Jane, not for Henry, but for Jane.
Yeah. I guess that's a good point. My thought was always that maybe she became pregnant and miscarried.
Perhaps that's also possible.
That we don't know. But also, if we think back to when did Jane come into the picture, when Henry was married to Anne, and would there have been enough time for her to realize she was pregnant? Because we always talk about the quickening, right? They didn't announce a pregnancy until they felt the baby stir. And at what point would that be? After the first trimester? I mean, then we're looking at 3 months.
I think that there wouldn't be a secure way to say for her, okay, yes, I'm pregnant. And then again, she was coached by Anne's enemies to refuse the king. So it was not like she was rushing to that bed.
I still think
she was playing for the highest, for the highest price. She was playing. But she learned from Anne. Again, Anne set a huge precedent because she was just a maid of honor at in Catherine of Aragon's household. And she set a precedent. It was a dangerous precedent, and she knew it because she was afraid. She was always looking behind her shoulder to other women,
Yeah.
And it was stressful for her because even if you're beautiful and you're young, your youth eventually you're not young anymore, because she was in her 30s already, and she was under pressure to produce a son, and there were always younger, prettier girls at court, and they were all the time new faces all the time. So even I think William Kingston commented about Anne's household that there are many new young faces. And Jane Seymour, by contrast, when she became queen, she started to surround herself with older, more mature, more experienced women. So that tells us a lot about Jane and a lot about Anne as well.
I cannot wait for Elizabeth Norton's new book on Jane Seymour to come out, because I really truly believe that Jane is not the person that we've been told that she was a Seymour through and through. I mean, we just have to look to her brothers, Edward and Thomas, as examples
Right.
of who and how she could have been as a person. But because she was a woman, and because she was a queen, and, because she ruled after, not even ruled, but because she married Henry after Anne Boleyn, that I think people just always assumed she was so pious and so innocent. And I think there was more to Jane
There was
Seymour.
definitely more to her. And I'm also very excited because I always had a soft spot for Jane, because I don't think she was trying to, topple Anne in a bloody way, like, oh, let's execute her, because that's not what the documents tells us. The documents tells us that the people who were plotting Anne Boleyn's downfall, they were plotting her possible banishment, possible annulment of the marriage. They use the words dismiss or divorce interchangeably. They never use the word execute, kill. That's not what they thought would happen. So to say that Jane plotted Anne's death is a way step too far, in my view. She must have been scared and surprised, just as everybody else, and to realize that she was married to a man who had just executed his wife. Horrible. But as you say, I think she learned how to disguise herself, perhaps. But then again, I'm not so sure if she disguised her motives that well, if she even tried, because she did plead for the restoration of the abbeys during the Pilgrimage of Grace.
Yeah.
She did plead with Henry to reconcile with his daughter, Lady Mary. And she was rudely repulsed by Henry on at least 3 or 4 occasions that I've counted. So that's a woman who is consistent, who is brave, who's not afraid to speak her own mind. So we've been told, again, like with Anne, we've been told something that's not really true.
Yes, for sure. Oh, I'm so looking forward to this research coming out on Jane. I cannot wait. But let's go back to the topic at hand today. It's so easy to veer off, isn't
It's
it?
easy to, but it's interesting also, isn't it? Because you can, we can talk about one subject and then another one comes up. So
Yes.
we're
So
still on the subject of Henry VIII's wives.
we are. Most important part. I want to go back to the peerage. And so we have Anne as Marchioness. Is that okay to say that? Or should I say Marquisette?
Marchioness of Pembroke,
Okay.
because that's a female title.
Okay, so she's Marchioness. So there are still women who rank above her prior to her marriage that are duchesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the one that comes to my mind immediately is the Duchess of Norfolk.
Yes. So the Duchess of Norfolk, who is Anne Boleyn's aunt by marriage. She's not that much older than her. They are approximately the same age.
Oh.
Because when we think about aunt and niece, we think about, oh, aunt must be older, but not really, because the Duchess of Norfolk was much younger than her husband. So Anne and the Duchess of Norfolk, they were approximately of the same age. But Elizabeth Howard hated Anne Boleyn, and Henry VIII wanted Elizabeth Howard and his own sister, Mary Tudor, the Duchess of Suffolk and Dowager Queen of France, to show their support to Anne, and he was very eager to have them during the ceremony so that they lead Anne Boleyn to him, because the Marquis was usually going between the two peers. So they led the newly minted Marquis towards the king, and that was supposed to happen with Anne, two duchesses leading her towards the king. But both women refused to have anything to do with Anne because they just hated her. Elizabeth Howard hated Anne because she saw Anne Boleyn as an upstart, and Elizabeth Howard was the kind of woman who was very sensitive about her status. So obviously she wouldn't bow to somebody who was beneath her. And Mary Tudor, I think it's easier to understand her because, okay, she was a Duchess of Suffolk, but she was also a Dowager Queen of France. So she was higher, much higher than Anne would ever, would ever be, because Anne would be queen, obviously. But at that point in time, Mary Tudor ranked higher than Anne. And also, Anne Boleyn used to be a maid of honor in Mary Tudor's household in France. So that was a reverse of a natural order, if you like. That's why she refused. Why would she serve somebody who served her as a maid of honor? Of course, if she wanted to be on Henry's good side, she would have said yes. But I think at that point, she just had enough of it because Henry was setting so many precedents just to make Anne his wife, reversing the natural order of things, That's why she refused. And eventually Anne was led to the king, to the king's presence between the two countesses, who were not that prominent women if we compare them to the duchesses of Norfolk and Suffolk. But if Henry VIII couldn't have those two women, he must have had someone else to lead Anne to him. But it was not the kind of win that Henry was trying to secure there. Not really.
No, it's kind of a slap in the face, isn't
Slap
it?
in the face. Another slap in the face again when there was a trip to Calais and Henry again invites the same two women to be in Anne's household, be in Anne's entourage. And again, they say no. They have the temerity to refuse him again. And, that's very awkward because it shows that Henry VIII can't control his sister. He can't control his subject, Elizabeth Howard. And if his sister refuses to serve Anne Boleyn, then Francis I's sister says, I'm not coming to Calais to welcome Anne Boleyn in France. So Marguerite d'Angoulême, Queen of Navarre, she's not there to welcome Anne. They make this decision, no women allowed. We don't need women, right? Just men's assembly. But of course, Anne Boleyn was coming with her entourage of women. About 30 women went with her. 7 of them in total danced with the French king and the French nobles during a masque when Anne reveals herself that she's Anne Boleyn, and she talks with the French king in a window embrasure. They talk, they exchange this, there's a conversation. Nobody really knows what they talk about, but presumably they talk about Anne's elevation to queenship, and maybe they talk about her time in France and when she served Queen Claude, who was dead by that time. Again, Francis I's wife, Eleanor of Austria, former Queen Consort of Portugal, she couldn't come either because she was Catherine of Aragon's niece, the sister of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. Henry VIII even jests and quips, no, we don't want her anyway, because seeing her would be like seeing a devil in a woman's dress. So that's Henry for you. Although I bet he would have loved to have Eleanor there, because that would show her support. But of course, how could a Habsburg, support
Right.
the woman who supplants her aunt as queen?
Right.
Impossible.
Yeah, because Catherine of Aragon was still alive at this point.
Yes, she was. It was so unprecedented because Henry VIII was creating a situation when he had 2 queens on one aisle. And of course, in 1533, he announced his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, marries Anne Boleyn. So basically for him, it's like Catherine is Dowager Princess of Wales. She was never my wife. She was never my queen. Anne Boleyn is my queen, my wife. He's like rewriting history But in reality, Catherine refuses to let go of her title. She's queen. She was anointed. Everybody is right in this quarrel, because Catherine is like, I was anointed as queen. Her servants are like, we sworn allegiance not to Princess Dowager of Wales, but to Queen of England. How are we supposed to break our oath now? That's like such an interesting precedent to be had. But it ended horribly for everybody involved except Henry, because he always wins, right? But Catherine banished, Anne Boleyn executed. Catherine died, exiled, almost alone, not really, but almost. She was never treated as queen ever again. Anne Boleyn, executed. So that didn't really go as planned, I think, when Anne Boleyn was receiving the title of the Marchioness of Pembroke, when she thought, oh, nice, I'm a Marchioness, I'm going to be queen, going to have a lot of sons.
Well, I guess maybe it was a blessing for us in the future to see how Henry VIII's decisions empowered some of these strong, noble women to speak up, because I wonder if we would have known how emboldened they would be or could be had it not been for the Anne Boleyn situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, would we have heard Henry's sister Mary, the Duchess of Suffolk, Dowager Queen of France, would we have known that she was such a strong woman to stand up to her brother? I mean, how would that have changed history if Anne never came into the picture? Would Mary have just gone into the shadows of history?
Just died, and we wouldn't know much about her. Yeah. That's true. We know how strong-willed she was. Well, she was a Tudor, so strong will, yeah. But interesting that she decided to be loyal to Catherine of Aragon rather than to the king. Although the primary allegiance was to Henry VIII, because he was the king in his own right. Catherine was a queen consort. But astonishingly, a lot of people chose to be loyal to her. Until, of course, it became treason to be loyal to her, and they swore the oath to Henry VIII, to his successors, his head of the church. Anne Boleyn is queen. So we have this brave new world, new reality. But yeah, a lot of women, Mary Tudor, Catherine of Aragon, even Lady Mary, Jane Seymour spoke very bravely. They fought for what they believed in. And Anne Boleyn in the end as well. She believed in her innocence, and she cooperated. She thought she was going to survive this.
Yeah. So speaking of Anne Boleyn's end, at the end, her marriage to Henry was annulled, so she was no longer queen. Did she still hold the title of Marchioness at the end? When she did?
Yes, because she was, when the marriage was annulled, she was no longer wife of Henry VIII, and she was referred to as Lady Anne in further documents from Henry VIII's reign. But interestingly, that in the inventory of Henry VIII's goods, she's Queen Anne again. So either she's queen or she's not queen. Henry VIII, make up your mind already. So it's interesting that it's not consistent. But if she survived this, if she wasn't executed, she would have been a Marchioness of Pembroke still. And her children, including Princess Elizabeth, if she didn't have any other children, Elizabeth would have been just Lady Elizabeth, debarred from succession. But she could have inherited the title of the Marchioness of Pembroke. But of course, it wasn't in Henry VIII's best interest to have Anne, to leave her, just, go have your life, live your life. No, because he would have been able to remarry without controversy and without scandal, with another wife just roaming the world, walking on the face of the earth. No, not really. So she had to die. And for example, Eustace Chapuis, the imperial ambassador, he summed it up really beautifully. He said that the executioner's sword was to divorce a man and wife. That's it. That was it.
Yeah. And something to think about too, and I don't know if anybody else has ever talked about this, but had he allowed Anne to live, she would have been a very powerful and wealthy
Mm,
woman to allow.
yes, she would have been at least wealthy. I'm not sure if powerful because I don't know who would have wanted to, make enemy of Henry VIII and,
True.
champion Anne. So perhaps not that powerful, but wealthy certainly. But again, not in Henry VIII's best interest to leave her to her own ends. She had to go. It's brutal. It's brutal. It shows you how brutal Henry VIII was. He was a dangerous, brutal man. He used legal language so well. There was really no question. If he wanted something, he gets it. Every single time. He wanted to marry Anne Boleyn, married Anne Boleyn. The only thing that he didn't get from this marriage was a son
Yeah.
that allegedly Anne promised him. There was really no reason to believe that she wouldn't be able to deliver one, because her family, her mother had children, had sons, her grandmother had sons, every other woman had sons. Why wouldn't she have sons? And that's where it all went so wrong, because in the end, it's not about Anne's intellect, why she became queen. It's not about how brilliant she was. It was about the biology. Her biology failed her. Or maybe didn't fail her because she gave birth to Princess Elizabeth. Elizabeth became queen, and she was queen for almost 40 years.
Yeah.
So that wasn't really a failure. That was a great success on Anne's part. But unfortunately for Anne, she didn't live to see the day to see her daughter becoming queen. And that's
No.
really sad because at the time, I think when she stood on that scaffold, she said all those nice things about Henry VIII, pray for him, he's a good prince, he always treated me right. She's really saying to Henry, just take care of our daughter. Don't hurt her. I think Henry VIII didn't really have a intention of hurting Elizabeth. He loved her. He knew she was his. But still, for Anne to say all those nice things about him, it was for Elizabeth.
Yeah. It does. I wonder too if Thomas Cromwell hadn't been such a close advisor to the king at the time, how things would have been different. Like I feel like Cromwell had a lot to do with helping Henry get what Henry wanted, right?
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
And Cromwell says that Henry VIII instructed him to get rid of Anne, so he did it. He was a good servant. He did it. I think the case here is that Henry VIII got so tired of Anne, and she didn't have sons. But then again, she was queen for only 3 years, and I think she had plenty of time to give birth if she was queen for a little bit longer. That almost looks for me like Henry VIII was so fed up with her. He had so, he had so enough of her that he just wanted to get rid of her. Perhaps love was no longer there. I don't think that Anne was that powerful towards the end of her life as many want to paint her as powerful. I don't think so. I think her well-being, the well-being of her family, all depended on the king's whim. And he got tired of her. And he wanted her gone. And look what happened. Anne was gone.
And now everybody remembers her name.
Now everybody remembers her name because she's immortal. He immortalized her. He helped her to become immortal because when she died, she passed straight from history and into the legend. What else do you want?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, Sylvia, this was such a fun discussion today. If people want to find your article, can they find it anywhere?
Yes, it's published in the Court Historian. It's an academic journal. I'm going to post a link so that you can maybe post it on your website when you publish this episode. But yeah, if you type the Court Historian or if you visit my social media platforms, I posted about it as well. If you want it and you don't have access, email me. I can send you a copy.
And remind people too, because obviously you have also written several books. Remind people of some of the books that you've written and where they can find them.
Okay, so on the subject of Anne Boleyn, I wrote 2 books, Ladies in Waiting, Women Who Served Anne Boleyn, a groundbreaking study about the women who served in Anne Boleyn's household, lots of new stuff there, and The Forgotten Years of Anne Boleyn, the Valois and the Habsburg Courts. You can get them, those books on Amazon as ebooks, as paperbacks, as hardbacks, and you can also get them in bookshops.
Wonderful. Sylvia, thank you so much for coming back again today.
Thank you so much for having me, Rebecca. It's always such great fun to talk to you.
And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron-exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tudorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.